Welcome back to the show, folks. Of course, you know my name is Big Al. That's what I call myself, Big Al. Our next guest is, I should say, first guest is they're from the Death Valley Junction Museum with historic trains, and I'm talking to Dorothy and John. Is that Slicker?
Slicker, just like
Slicker.
city
Yeah.
slicker.
It's like, oh boy. Anyway, they're here, and we're going to talk about and get some information about some of the early parts of Nevada, which happened to be up in this here, I would imagine, is the Tonopah and Tidewater Historical Society. And that's going to be, of course, at Death Valley Junction. I didn't realize that they call that Death Valley Junction at Amargosa Opera House. And what is the mission of that?
Well, our mission is to perpetuate the study and advancement of knowledge of the Tonopah Tidewater Railroad. And with the goal of building this railroad museum at Death Valley Junction and to preserve and share what we've learned with both the young and the old.
Wow.
You'd be surprised at the children here in Pahrump that have heard nothing about railroads since there's never been a railroad through Pahrump.
Wow. You know, I was thinking about that when you talk about, I always loved trains. And when I was a little kid, we had the little round train, because I was a little young then. But the little train where it was about maybe 12 inches, yeah. And
The
you,
Lionel train set
right,
around
and
the
then
Christmas tree.
you're right, you wind it up and so forth, and that was it. Now, what's going on there? And,
Okay, the difference between this Tonopah Tidewater Museum and the trains that you're talking about is we are the very first to take and bring forth the history and the authenticity of the original railroad that came in to Death Valley Junction. And this is the railroad that was to replace the mule teams
Wow.
hauling borax, and everybody knows about the 20 mule team. And I'll let John explain to you about the.
yeah, how far does it go back when we talk about those
The
trains?
railroad started in 1903 and it ended up at Death Valley Junction in 1907. And it was originally going to go clear to Tonopah. It never made it, and it was going to go on down to the south to Tidewater. Never made it that far. So the history of the railroad only was in operation 35 years, 36 years to be exact. So the main thing about Death Valley Junction was a junction then to bring the ore. Some of it was in narrow gauge cars, and they transferred it over into standard gauge cars for shipment south. And when you go back 100 years, you got to remember that the highways were not like they are today, and also the transportation as far as trucks and stuff was not like it is today. So they depended on the railroad at that time, because Death Valley Junction and Death Valley was quite a remote area back in 100 years ago.
Wow. Now, these two pictures that you have that he's showing up there, talk a little bit about those. I'm looking at those now as far as the railroad. Is that where it came through there?
The railroad actually came right in front of which today it's more famous to be the Opera House. Back in its heyday when they built it, it was to house, they had a grocery store in it, an infirmary, so it was more or less like a self-sufficient, what the railroad needed to be self-sufficient, because it was so far away from any main town. So
Now, Marta Beckett, she donated to us the building that we're in.
Oh,
And we're lucky enough that this building is the original office of the man who built the railroad. It is the old bank, and we have the old safes are there. And it was the payroll office, and handled all the money and transactions for the whole city there.
city there. Wow. Now, I want him to put up the picture that we have here on the table of the building over there, and that's the trains and things like that. Now, the train that I'm looking at, that wasn't a passenger train. Is it mostly they haul freight and things like that?
Well, actually, during that time, they hauled both. I just don't have a passenger car on
Right.
it.
Well, they
had
did.
had a little engine they called the Doodlebug. It had a gasoline engine in there, and they hauled passengers and baggage and that sort along with them. I might add, too, as far as the railroad itself, the reason why people say, well, I don't see any indication of a railroad there
Right.
anymore. When they ceased operation in 1939 and the World War II started in 41, they picked up all the rails then and made war materials out of them. And also the ties, which were not creosoted, were used in buildings. They used them in buildings. There's a motel in Barstow that's built completely out of the ties from the railroad. So
This is something I never knew, and I think a lot of people don't realize that.
And you know the famous Furnace Creek Inn?
I've heard about that.
This railroad built the Furnace Creek Inn.
Is that right?
And this, you heard him talk about the Doodlebug. Well, the railroad did bring passengers from the Los Angeles area eventually when all of the ore and stuff was going south on them. Then they started hauling passengers, and so then they used the Doodlebug to take and haul these passengers into the Furnace Creek Inn. And that was like a resort. They had an indoor swimming pool, tennis courts, and all of that stuff to house their passengers overnight and then take them back to the LA area.
Wow. So what you're saying is that the distance that this railroad traveled from what area?
Ludlow, California is where they
Okay.
railheaded with Santa Fe.
Oh, okay. And then along through here.
Came through Shoshone,
Right.
Tacoma first, Shoshone, and then Death Valley Junction, branched off to Death Valley, and then went up to Rhyolite, which was one of the largest cities in Nevada at that
Right.
time.
Very good. What kinds of things are you going to be looking for the museum?
Well, we're looking for all kinds of artifacts that have to deal with the borax and with the old train. We have old memorabilia of the signs, old cartons and containers of borax soap. You know that the borax and stuff was the first things that came into the families' homes in the form of laundry detergent, bath soaps, and those types of things. So since we have such a small area and most of it's going to be taken up with the railroad itself, we have just small areas. So we'll just have mainly photographs of the history and small articles of them.
When will this?
Area.
When will this open? The museum open? Do you have
We're
a
planning to have our grand opening in either January or February of 2013.
2013.
We've had our ribbon cutting. We are now inside. John's laying track and stuff on the tables, and I'm doing the artwork around the wall, the murals around the wall and stuff. And so people are welcome to come out and visit with us and learn about the railroad and watch us work putting it together.
So you are an artist.
Yes, I
also.
am.
John, you an artist too? Also?
No, no,
No.
No, I
I'm a
teach.
flunky.
I teach oil painting
Oh, okay.
and stuff in my studio at home, and I work with PAC and quite a few different art groups, the Spring Mountain Art Guild, and
I might add that you can't buy like the Opera House that we see over here, and the locomotives and the cars. They all have to be hand done. They were researched and repainted. They were type wooden cars that you can't buy today, so they've all been worked over by hand, and we have pictures of them, and we're as close to what the original pictures are as we could get. So
that railroad train right there was all put together by Bob Carter.
Wow.
He researches the history of the cars and things, and he's got all the exact weights and measurements and numbers and things on the train.
Give us, before we run out, I want you to give us the time and the address or telephone number that someone can call you and get more information.
Well, they can call John or Dorothy Slicker, 775-751-4608. And that's our home phone number, and we're there most all the time.
Listen, I appreciate you coming in, talking about this, and this is going to be interesting. Thanks again for sharing this with us.
Thank you
Thank
for
you, Al.
having us.
All right. Stay tuned, folks. We'll be back after these messages.